The Hfycodex was sitting in a small diner with broken lights and old chairs. The rain outside was heavy and cold. The clock on the wall ticked slowly, and his coffee had gone cold long ago. His phone was dead, and he had only $5 in his pocket. He looked tired, like someone who had stopped caring. Then the door opened, and she walked in. She was tall, wearing a long black coat and dark glasses. Her hair was tied back, and her face looked calm but serious. People inside the diner stopped for a second and stared at her, like something about her didn't feel normal. She walked straight to John and sat down in front of him, like she knew him, like they had planned this meeting, but they hadn't said his name. Very softly, John Miller. John looked at her, confused but curious. "Do I know you?" he asked. She said, "No, but I know you." He looked around, trying to understand what was happening, but she leaned forward and spoke quietly. "I want to hire you to be my husband." John blinked. He almost laughed. "Excuse Mesh didn't smile. "Fake husband, only for 6 months. I will pay you $5,000 every week." John leaned back, still thinking it was a joke. "Why me?" "Because you have no one," she said, "and you need money. You have no job, no family, no future, and nothing to lose." John felt cold inside, because she was right, completely right. "Who are you?" he asked. She didn't answer that. Instead, she took out a photo from her coat and pushed it toward him. The photo showed her standing between 3 tall men in black suits and sunglasses, but their eyes looked strange, not human. Their skin too smooth, their smiles too wide, and around her neck was a red glowing mark. "What is this?" John asked. She looked at him with fear in her eyes for the first time. "They are watching me. If I am single, they will take me. If I am married, they leave me alone. That is their rule." John frowned, still confused. "Who are they?" She leaned even closer and whispered, "They are not human, and they don't like liars." John looked again at the photo. He noticed the background, now a building that was half destroyed, and a sky that looked red, like something from a different world. He was about to ask more, but suddenly the lights in the diner blinked once, then twice. Then the whole place felt cold, like something had entered that didn't belong. A tall man in a black suit entered the diner and stood near the door. He didn't order anything. He didn't sit. He just looked directly at them, his head tilted slightly, like he was listening. She grabbed John's hand under the table and held it tight. Her hand was shaking. "Say yes right now, or we both die tonight." John's heart started ratcheting. "Serious?" he whispered. She nodded. "My name is Alara. I'm not who you think I am, but I need you to help me, or they will take me, and if they take me, I won't come back." John looked at the man near the door, who was now walking slowly toward them. Then he looked at Alara, who looked strong but scared at the same time, like someone who had been running for a long time. He thought for a moment about his life. The empty apartment, the unpaid bills, the cold nights with no heat, the broken dreams, and the quiet pain. Then he said, "Okay, I'll do it." She let out a breath, like she had been holding it for days, and said, "Good, now smile and hold my hand tighter." John smiled, a little confused, but tried to follow her lead. The man in the black suit passed by their table. Slowly his head turned toward them, but he didn't stop. After a long moment, he walked out of the diner without saying a word. The air felt warm again, the lights stopped flickering, and the sound of the rain returned. Ella looked at John. "Thank you. But this is only the beginning." John nodded slowly, still unsure what he had just agreed to. She said, "Tomorrow morning we get married, and tonight you sleep in my house. No questions, no lies, only trust." John stood up with her and walked out of the diner into the cold night, not knowing that this fake marriage was about to lead him into something far bigger than he had ever imagined. Tikiariulis, the wedding was fake, but the fear was real. John stood in front of a mirror, wearing a suit that wasn't his, in a house that wasn't his, beside a woman he didn't really know, but had just promised to protect with his life. Alara stood next to him, silent, calm, her eyes watching the window, as if something outside was waiting to strike. A man came into the room holding a small machine. It was black and had glowing blue lines across it. He pointed at John and said, "You need to hold this and repeat after me." John held the device. It was warm and felt like it was breathing, like it had a heartbeat of its own. Man said, "I promise to protect her, even if the sky falls and the stars Fate, I promise I am her husband, and no one can take her. John repeated the words. The machine blinked once, then stopped glowing. Good, said the man. Now she is safe for now. That night Alara gave John a small notebook with 3 pages inside. Each one had a rule written in her careful handwriting. Sat on the bed while she stood by the door and read the rules out loud. Rule 1. Never open the basement door, not even if you hear someone calling your name from inside. Rule 2. Always answer the landline phone before the 3rd ring, and always say we are happy together, even if no one replies. Rule 3. Never ever sleep in a separate room, no matter how tired, angry, or scared you feel. John laughed a little. Is this a horror movie or something? Smile. These rules keep us alive. They are not a joke. He looked at her and asked, why do they care? If we act like a real couple, isn't the marriage enough? She sat on the edge of the bed and looked down, because they know the difference between fake love and real love. They can smell it, they can feel it, and if they sense we are lying, they will come. John looked around the room. Everything felt too quiet, the air too heavy, the walls seemed to breathe slowly, like the house was alive. He asked, who are they? What do they want from you? She looked up slowly and said, they want control over everything, over people, over emotions, over fear, and I'm something they can't control. He said, what are you? She didn't answer. Instead, she turned off the lights and lay down beside him, whispering, just follow the rules and you might survive. That night, John couldn't sleep. He stared at the ceiling while listening to strange whispers from the basement, the sound of footsteps walking in circles, and a voice that sounded like his own calling his name again and again. John Miller, come down here. I need your help. He covered his ears, but the voice got louder. The doorknob began to shake as if someone or something was trying to come up. He looked at Alara, but she was asleep or pretending to be asleep, her back turned away. He got up slowly, walking to the basement door, his hand almost touching the knob, when the landline phone began to ring sharp and loud, breaking the silence. He ran to it, picked it up on the 3rd ring, and said, we are happy together. No reply, just a deep long breath on the other side, and then a click. Turned around and the basement door was open, just a cold hand reaching out from the dark. Then Alara appeared behind him and slammed the door shut, locking it with a metal bolt he hadn't seen before. She looked angry and scared, her voice shaking. I said never open that door. He said it was calling me. It sounded like Mesh nodded slowly. They learn fast, they take shapes, they use your memories. They want you to believe the lie, so you break the rules. John sat down, holding his head, confused and afraid. He whispered, what have I gotten into? Alara sat beside him and said something. You were always meant to face something inside you is waking up, and they know it the next morning. John looked at himself in the mirror again, but this time his reflection didn't blink when he did. Lidtc2 John opened his eyes, but the room around him was not the same. The bed was gone, the windows were gone, the light above him was red, not warm, but sharp like a warning sign, and Alara was standing in front of him with a strange device in her hands. Tried to move, but his arms were locked to the chair by silver bands. They looked thin but felt like steel. He said, what is this? Why am I tied up? She didn't smile, she didn't speak. She placed the device on his chest and whispered, this will only hurt if you lie. Then a door opened and a woman entered the room. She had short, white hair and her eyes looked like they had never seen sleep. She wore a dark green coat and carried a clipboard filled with names and numbers that changed every second. She looked at John and said, my name is Ava. I ask questions, you answer them. If you lie, the machine will know, and the machine does not forgive. John felt the device on his chest begin to move like a spider crawling over his heart. Ava asked, what is your name? John Miller. The device blinked once, stayed silent. Do you love Alara? John laughed a little too fast and said, of course I do. The device turned cold, blue light flashed, and a sharp sound filled the room like a scream made of metal. John cried out as pain shot through his chest, not from the outside, but from inside, like his blood had turned into fire. For a second, Ava nodded and said, try again with the truth. John breathed hard, sweat running down his face. He whispered, I don't know her well enough to say that the device turned warm again. Good, said Ava. Now we can begin. Question. After question followed, have you seen anything strange since the wedding? Yes. Did you try to open the basement door? Yes. Do you feel like something is watching you, even when alone? Yes. Do you hear voices that sound like you? Yes. Do you believe you are completely human? John stopped, his mouth open, but no words came out. He looked at Alara. She looked at the floor like she already knew what was coming. Ava stepped closer and repeated the question. Do you believe you are completely human? John said, I think so. The machine screamed again, and the pain this time made him shake. His heart raced, and his head filled with old memories of places he had never visited and dreams of stars he had never seen but somehow remembered. Ava looked into his eyes and said, John, we have a problem. He whispered, what am I? Ava said, we don't know yet, but they do, and that means they'll come for you too. Now she turned to Alara and said, the fake marriage is not enough anymore. You need to bond deeper. The next step must happen within 3 days, or he will burn from the inside. Lara nodded, but her hands were shaking. John was released from the chair, and the bands disappeared like smoke. He sat on the floor holding his chest and said, why me? What did I ever do? Ava walked to the door and said, maybe nothing, maybe everything. Maybe you are the reason they came to Earth in the first place. The door closed and the room went dark again. Alara helped him up and whispered, I didn't just choose you, John. I recognized you. He looked into her eyes and asked from where. She said, from a dream that wasn't mine. That night John looked in the mirror again, and this time the reflection moved before he did. Tiakayan Vison. The sky turned green for 3 minutes. No thunder, no rain, just green. Like someone had pulled a curtain across the stars and whispered, you don't belong here. John stood on the roof barefoot, holding a cup of tea that had gone cold hours ago, his eyes fixed on the clouds that refused to move. The world below was silent, too silent, like the city was holding its breath. He whispered to himself, they're already here, isn't that right? Elarashi stood behind him, not saying anything, her hands hidden inside the sleeves of a long coat, her eyes glowing faintly, not bright enough to notice unless you were looking closely. And John was always looking now. He had stopped sleeping 3 days ago, not because of the rules, not because of fear, but because his dreams were getting too loud, too real. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw metal towers rising from oceans and voiding skies and voices calling him in a language he had never heard, but somehow understood. You are not one of them, not anymore, not ever. Alara handed him a small device. It looked like a pocket watch, but when he opened it, the inside was a tiny map showing blinking red dots moving across the city. She said, one of them is nearby, watching, following, testing our walls. They're not looking for me anymore, they're looking for you now. John said, why me? Why are they changing focus? She answered, because they can't read you anymore, and that scares them more than anything. Suddenly, the device beeped fast and loud. One of the red dots stopped moving and turned black. John asked, what does that mean? She looked at him with eyes that no longer tried to hide. It means they took someone. They ran down the stairs of the building. Alara moving like shadow, John still getting used to how light his feet felt, how fast he had become without even noticing. They turned into the alley behind the apartment block, where a man in a blue jacket lay on the ground, eyes wide open, mouth frozen in a silent scream, his hands stretched out as if reaching for something that wasn't there. John bent down and touched the man's forehead, cold, but still breathing, his heart slow but steady like a ticking time bomb counting down. Alara whispered he saw something he wasn't meant to understand, so they took his thoughts away, not his body, yet just his memory. John stood and looked around. The walls were covered in fresh symbols, glowing symbols, written in circles and spirals, pulsing softly like breathing lungs. He could feel them in his skin like heat, like hunger. One of the symbols blinked twice, and John's hand moved on its own, reaching toward Itelara, grabbed his wrist and pulled him back. Don't to touch that, not unless you want to hear all the voices at once. John stepped back, breathing heavy, his pulse racing. He said, this is spreading, isn't it? This invasion, whatever it is, it's not just hunting you anymore. Yala nodded. Yes, they started with watchers. Now they want the connected ones like you, like others who don't know what they are yet. John looked up and saw 3 tall figures standing on the rooftop across the street. No eyes, no mouths, just pale skin and black coats blending with the sky. They didn't move, but they didn't need to. Their presence was louder than any sound. Alara said, "We need to leave this city. They are closing in too fast, and soon this place will fall." John whispered, "Where do we go? Where can we run?" She looked at him and said, "We don't run. We find the others." John asked, "What others?" She stepped closer and touched his chest where the pain had started days ago. "The ones like you. The ones who were left behind, just like you." Suddenly, the man in the blue jacket sat up and screamed a word that wasn't English, not human, not safe. The sound shattered a street lamp and made every dog in the neighborhood howl in pain. Alara pulled John away, and they ran as the sky above flashed green again, just for a second, but enough to remind them, are not visitors, they are not guests, they are claiming this place peace. By peace, the escape PLN. John saw his own face in the mirror, but it wasn't breathing. Stood still in the small bathroom of an abandoned motel, somewhere on the edge of nowhere where the walls leaked and the lights hummed like distant voices, and the mirror refused to fog even though the room was filled with steam behind him. Alara watched quietly, her eyes tired, her body still wrapped in the same coat from 3 days ago. Her shadow never touching the floor. "You're changing," she whispered. John said, "I don't feel like myself anymore." "That's because you're not," she replied. He turned to her, his hands shaking, like something inside was trying to break free, something he couldn't name, but could feel in his teeth and his blood in the way birds flew away whenever he stepped outside. She walked to the window, pulled back the curtain just a little, and showed him the world beyond it. Was moving too slowly, cars drifting like ghost trees, swaying like they were underwater, people walking, but not really walking, more like moving, because something told them to. John asked, "What's wrong with theme?" Alara said, "This area is under a low-frequency field. It keeps minds numb, slows resistance, makes fear taste like sleep." Stepped back from the window and said, "I'm scared." Elarashi looked at him and said, "Good, you should be. Fear is still human." They sat on the floor, maps and notes spread around them, half-burned papers, strange tokens, old photos of people with glowing eyes all marked with red. Zacelara pointed to a town hidden in the hills surrounded by forest and rivers. The name was scratched out. She said, "We go there, no signals, no drones, no watchers, only quiet, and maybe answers." John asked, "Who will help us there?" She replied, "Not who, what." He didn't understand but didn't ask again. They packed in silence before leaving. Alara handed him a small ring made of metal he didn't recognize. It was warm and seemed to pulse in his hand. She said, "Wear this and think of me not as protection, but as proof of what he asked, that we were real." They drove all night through empty highways, past dark gas stations where the lights blinked in slow, unnatural rhythm, past forests where eyes watched from behind trees, not animals, not machines, just watchers, silent, patient. John kept checking the mirror, expecting to see himself missing again, or someone else sitting in the backseat, someone who looked like him but smiled too wide. As they reached the edge of the zone, the air changed, the sky became darker, but the stars looked closer, like they had leaned in to listen. Alara pulled over and said, "We walk from here. Signals don't work past this point. Engines stall, hearts beat faster." They walked for hours until the road disappeared and the world became only trees and silence. Then a whisper came from the wind, not words, just pressure, like thoughts brushing against their skin. Alara stopped and said, "They know we're here, but they won't follow, not yet." "Not into this place?" John asked. "What is this place?" She answered, "This is where the original ones went into hiding, after the collapse, after the division, after the choice." "What choice?" he asked. "The choice to stay and become human, or leave and become nothing." They reached a stone gate, covered in moss, symbols etched deep into the rock, symbols that pulsed when John stepped closer. The gate opened on its own, and the air behind it smelled like memory. John walked through and heard something call his name, not loudly, not with voice, but with certainty. Ella touched his shoulder and said, "If we survive the next 2 days, you will know everything." He asked, "What happens in 2 days?" She said, "The last solar ring aligns, and when that happens, the fake bond we created will not be enough. They will test it, they will try to break it, And if you break before I do, they take me." John looked at her eyes now glowing gold, and said, "I won't break." She smiled for the first time in days, and said, "Then I won't vanish." The It began with silence, so deep it made John's heartbeat sound like thunder in his own ears. Was standing in a field of white grass under a black sky where stars blinked, like eyes closing slowly one by one. He didn't remember falling asleep, but he was dreaming, and in the dream, he was alone. No Ilarano. Watchers, no pain, just a voice that felt like his own, but older, darker, colder. "You." They'd been wearing the wrong name, it said. He turned around, but there was no one, just mirrors floating in the air, and every mirror showed a version of him with eyes that didn't blink and smiles that didn't stop. "You are not broken," the voice said. "You are unfinished." He tried to run, but the ground pulled him down like soft mud, like hands holding ankles. Then he woke up, but the silence came with him. The cabin was empty. The maps were gone. The door was open, and the world outside looked wrong. Trees bent the wrong way, birds flying backward, shadows stretching toward the sun. John stepped outside, saw marks in the dirt, signs of struggle, a handprint glowing blue, and a single word carved into the earth with something sharp. Tere. His breath caught in his chest, and he whispered her name, Ilara, but the trees didn't echo back. They swallowed the sound. He ran without direction, heart pounding, sky twisting around him, until he found the clearing where they had set up the signal shield, but it was broken now, cracked and burned, and still smoking, and in the center was her coat folded neatly with no blood, no tears, just folded like she wanted him to find. "I've picked it up." In the world around him blinked one, blinked two, then black. He woke up in a white room, cold lights humming above him, and no doors, no windows, just blank space and a chair, and a screen and a voice coming from nowhere. Subject 7-1, a now active. He sat up and said, "Where is she?" The voice ignored him. Emotional tether detected. Bond stability 63%. Human contamination 38%. Subject no longer safe for field for memory split. He screamed her name again, louder this time, and the walls shook just slightly enough to matter. Then a face appeared on the screen, not his, not Ilara's, but someone in between, skin like metal, eyes like ice, lips that didn't move. The voice said, "You were not supposed to wake." John said, "I want her back." The voice replied, "She was never yours." Were placed near her as a measure of balance, but the bond grew past control, and now both assets are corrupted. John's head throbbed, memory flashing in pieces. A ship, a room full of lights, a metal crib, and hands that glowed blue. He remembered floating in dark water. Not water, but code. He remembered being built, not born. The voice said, "You were our first attempt to feel something, and you did, but now you must forget." The machine on the wall started to pulse, counting down from 10, 9, 8. John closed his eyes, and for the first time reached inside, not with hands, not with thought, but with whatever was left of what he had become. He touched the tether, touched Ilara. He heard her scream in return. It was not pain, it was rage from far beyond the walls, from somewhere deep in the grid. She reached back and broke something in the system. The lights shattered. The walls cracked. The voice glitched and repeated the same word again and again. "Eororrrro." On stood up, body glowing, veins lit like circuits, heart no longer beating but pulsing with light. He whispered, "I remember," and the room melted.